Hello and welcome to another video which is going to get you the top grades. There are 5 things that I want to teach you specifically which are going to get you the top grades. So if we start thinking about the sonnet form, you will always be able to write about form and structure, which is where the grades 7 and above are. You will quickly find out what a Petrarchan sonnet is and why she chose to write in that form. The sonnet is a really old-fashioned form, and it was even old-fashioned then. And that's important because this was a private poem written for her lover, Robert Browning, and she was never going to publish these poems. There were 45 of them, or 44, depending on who you believe, in this book. And she did not want to publish them at all, but her husband persuaded her to once they got married. And so they are deeply erotic. Now this presents me with a few problems because most teachers, I think, just teach the kind of Christian interpretation that it's all about love. Well, it is about love, but it's actually much more about an erotic kind of love as well. Well, you can ignore that eroticism when we get to it, because I will also give you the conventional interpretation. Are you ready? So it's going to be really useful to know something about the poet. So she came from a wealthy family. However, the family had acquired its wealth from slavery. So she had a huge falling out with her father, who was still running this slave business and not actually necessarily trading in slaves, but using them on sugar plantations. But she also had a long-term illness which went undiagnosed, and she had to take opiates for it. So a lot of her poetry, many people believe, are influenced by these kind of visionary dreams that she would have had as a result of taking drugs on a regular basis. Drugs were not illegal in the 1900s. She later developed lung disease as well, which meant that she spent all her time reading and writing. She wasn't really involved in other things in life before she met Robert Browning. Modern interpretations of her writing concentrate on the Christian themes that she brings, but actually her first bits of writing were about social justice and campaigning for change. Well, how's this going to be useful? It's going to be useful because it shows that she's not a conventional thinker. She doesn't believe in the ideas of the time. She believes in freedom and in justice. And these things are going to be important because she wrote these poems leaving the United Kingdom. She didn't feel that she could live a fulfilled life in British society, and she went to Italy, lived there till she was died. Now, Robert was 6 years younger than her. Now, this is going to be important because he was also a poet, but not as well known as she was. She was a very, very well known as a poet. And he wrote to her as a fan. They then met, developed this courtship, this love story, and they eloped together to Italy. And the reason they ran away to Italy, apart from trying to escape British life, is that she rejected her father. And also her father rejected her. So he disowned her, he took her out of the will, and she never in fact spoke to her father again. So she replaced that male in her life with her husband. But this also suggests that she was a deeply attractive woman and also erotic, a sexual human being who would attract a much younger man. That's going to be important in your understanding of this private poem. Now, it's difficult for us to understand the attraction because there he is, there's Robert Browning with a very odd facial hairstyle which to modern eyes makes him look a bit like an orangutan, but she was attracted and he was a gorgeous young man. And now the poems, the collection were called Sonnets from the Portuguese. Now this is crucial. So the idea was, let's publish these poems. They're deeply erotic and they're deeply personal. Well, readers might struggle with this, and so we're going to give the illusion that they're not erotic and personal by saying that they were originally written in Portuguese and then Elizabeth Barrett Browning just translated them. And so, you know, you might not quite understand the imagery, or it might suggest something sexual, but don't worry, that's just because it was written in a foreign language. Now this, if you like, was a bit of a game. They expected, I say they, both Brownings, expected the readers to see through this, but it was a convenient kind of fiction. It was a way of saying, look, dear reader, you and I both know that these poems are erotic, but we don't want to talk about their eroticism because it's the 1900s and respectable people don't advertise this. But we know and you know that you'll be interested in this stuff, so we'll pretend that they're not really written with erotic intent. They were hugely widely read when they were published in 1845, but they were written before that, when Robert Browning was her lover. Yes, she didn't wait to get married. She was a free-thinking woman of the time. So, another way that they got round this was by saying, I say they, modern critics have said her husband reputedly called her My Little Portuguese. I think this is just a fiction. So to try and not interpret these as erotic poems, to give them some other kind of interpretation, you'll decide for yourself as we go through. Well, you've waited patiently. Let's have a look at the actual sonnet. So you may know that a sonnet is a 14-line poem, and it is usually about romantic love. In the English language, Shakespeare is our most famous sonnet writer, and he developed his own rhyme scheme. But this sonnet is not written with that rhyme scheme. So Elizabeth Barrett Browning went back to Petrarch, the original inventor of the sonnet form, and the Petrarchan sonnet has a very definite rhyme scheme. ABBA, ABBA, CBCBCB. If you're not familiar with what that means, it means A, bud, B, tree. So C rhymes with tree, so that's B rhyming with B. Would rhymes with bud, which is A again. And then we have the same here. Stood thee, lee, should, bear thee, wear thee, ere thee. So that's how the rhyme scheme works. And she sticks to that very regularly. She also writes in iambic pentameter, where the first syllable is not stressed and the second one is. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud. I've over-exaggerated it for effect. So she's writing in this strict Petrarchan form. However, in all sonnets there's always a volta, and that's the Italian for a change, a turn. And Elizabeth Barrett Browning has 4 turns in her poem. Now this is important because it keeps us guessing. We have to work out what her mind is changing to at each time, and this is going to lead to the erotic interpretation of the poem. Let's zoom into the beginning of the poem. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee, as wild vines about a tree put out broad leaves, and soon there's naught to see. So in this image she imagines herself as vines like ivy surrounding a tree. As you can see, there's naught to see, there's nothing to see, because you can only see the vines, and the tree then becomes like the body of Robert Browning that she's imagining, and she's saying her vines, her thoughts are like vines completely surrounding him, so that you can no longer see the man inside. So here are some conventional interpretations of this image. So if we come up here, we've got the caesura, which means a sudden stop of surprise or passion. I think of thee, dash. She's suddenly so excited by thinking about him that she has to stop and remind herself of what he looks like. So this marks it out as a love poem about the thing that she loves, her future husband. The dash and the short phrases, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee as wild vines about a tree, suggest breathlessness and the passion of her excitement at seeing her husband again. We could argue that the natural imagery of the vine around the tree suggests a symbiotic relationship. So in a symbiotic relationship, 2 organisms feed each other. Well, I think that doesn't really work because if you think about vines, they actually exist as parasites. They suck nutrients from the bark of the tree. So when we think of the image that way, she must be quite critical of herself for surrounding the tree in this way, and it more suggests that she's suffocating as the vine hides the wood, which we get in the later line of the tree. Now, many people think, well, this is because she was ill and didn't see herself as a desirable partner for a man who would want to marry a sick wife who possibly couldn't provide him with children. And so they see the vine as an image where she's really being critical of herself and saying she's not worthy of her husband's love, but still wants it. Then leads to another interpretation. If the vines are wild, it suggests that she is dangerous to him. Perhaps she's being critical of how much passion she has for him. She feels that she's suffocating him with too much love. Well, those ideas don't work for me and don't work for what we know of her life. So here is Florence in the 1800s, where she went. You can see the difference between this and England, and this kind of escape into sunshine, into beautiful architecture, away from the Industrial Revolution. This is a more modern view of the same scene with the palm trees in view here. And the palm tree is our first introduction to very private symbolism. So she calls her future husband, "Oh, my palm tree. Be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee." So she's saying she's not going to put up with his absence. She's not going to put up with just thinking about him. She demands his presence. She wants him. Now, the conventional view is that, oh, well, the palm tree is a kind of symbolic of victory. It's a Roman sort of symbol. So maybe she's rejoicing in the fact that she's got this wonderful young man to love her. Well, it might work. You know, the Romans did come from Italy. After all, she is going to Italy. So that sort of works. But even so, what is the victory here? It could equally be an erotic one. Many commentators decide that it's linked to the idea of Palm Sunday. So when Jesus came into Jerusalem, palm fronds were used to kind of coat the dusty roads so that the donkey's hooves wouldn't kick up dust all over Jesus as he rode a donkey into Jerusalem. And now we commemorate that every Sunday with palm leaves in church. And so they argue that this is a kind of religious symbolism. Well, that doesn't really work for me either, because that would suggest that she is comparing him to Jesus, which is a sacrilegious idea. By sacrilegious, I mean it goes against the Christian teaching by saying he's like Jesus, and a Christian person just would find that difficult to do. So I don't buy that interpretation either. And so later on I will explain the erotic interpretation of it. Then we have this quotation, "And let these bands of greenery which ensphere thee drop heavily down, burst, shattered everywhere." And so readers say, well, you know, why is she suddenly deciding to get rid of her thoughts, the vines? Well, it could be that she wants to prevent herself from behaving like the vine, suffocating her husband, trapping him and obscuring him. And therefore the poem is a kind of apology for obsessing too much about him. Well, that to me feels like a kind of sexist interpretation where she would see her husband as better than she is and is therefore playing a traditional subservient role. I mean, that goes against what we know about the couple. She was a far more accomplished and famous poet than her husband, and his fame only really came after she died in 1861. It was at the time this poem was written, she was the famous poet, and he wasn't. I just don't buy this idea that she's kind of apologising to her husband for her love and passion and obsession for him. That comes out of a kind of sexist interpretation that she should be grateful for the love of a younger man, and she being only a sick woman and not very desirable. I think that's rubbish. We get to the end of the poem then, and the conventional view is when she says, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee, she's basically demanding his presence so that they can marry. So these poems are written prior to the elopement to Italy, and basically saying, come on, marry me. I want you. You're going to be my partner forever. That keeps it as a love poem, and it gives her a certain amount of power in the relationship rather than just being subservient. Now this makes it a kind of rebel sonnet, because most sonnets are romantic, but they involve the lover with an unrequited ending, and that means that the love is expressed in the poem, but we don't get the idea that it's going to be satisfied necessarily by the person it's written to or about. And if it is, there's not a mention of sexual passion in them. They're just a kind of romantic love that's expressed in pure, chaste terms. Okay, so you've now learnt how to talk about the structure of the poem and to relate that to the meaning of it as a love story. You can write about the poet's purpose in trying to celebrate the love for her lover, and it's written directly to him. He is the original audience. And you can also write about Browning's desire to get her to publish the poems because he thinks their quality is so high. Okay, well, let's now dive into the erotic imagery that's in the poem. I think of thee, my thoughts do twine and bud about thee, as wild vines about a tree put out broad leaves, and soon there's naught to see. Well, there's a kind of excitement in the rhythm of that, isn't there? She's enjoying surrounding his tree with the twine of her thoughts, the vines, the wild vines. Well, wild does suggest a kind of sexual passion, and the tree is going to be symbolic of a phallic object. I don't want to spell that out too much in case I get demonetized, but anyway, it is a phallic image, and so she is surrounding the phallus. Except the straggling green which hides the wood. Yet, O my palm tree, be it understood, I will not have my thoughts instead of thee, who art dearer, better. Well, here, if he's a palm tree, he is the wood, he is that tall phallic shape. Rather instantly renew thy presence as a strong tree should. So she is asking for him to become aroused, to become the strong tree, to become that presence again. On the one hand, she means come back to me because she's thinking about him when he's not there. But on the other hand, she's asking us to imagine through this metaphor that he is there, but she's asking him to become manly again, to renew his presence, to reveal his tree again. This is why she now talks about the tree as his body. Rustle thy boughs. So the boughs are like the branches, the arms on the body. The trunk is like the trunk of the body as well as the trunk of the tree. And she wants to experience that all bare. She wants his body. She desires it. Now, this isn't some sort of kind of titillating sexual imagery. It's deeply erotic, written by her to her husband, or her husband-to-be, to her lover. Now she refers to her own thoughts, but as vines, but of course, now that we're thinking of the tree as his body, we're now starting to think about the vines as her body. And she describes her body and her thoughts as bands of greenery which ensphere thee. So we've got this kind of circular motion going on up and down the tree. And she wants to drop heavily down, burst, shattered everywhere. This is a climactic sentence. We've got this trochaic pattern, this 3, where you've got the syllables hammering out, burst, shattered everywhere, full of passion and release. So once she has been burst and shattered, then she has another Volta, because in this deep joy to see and hear thee, and breathe within thy shadow a new air. So it's now, after this erotic relationship, or this erotic encounter, that she's now going to be able to have a period of calm when she's going to breathe him in, breathe his presence in. It's then that she will not be thinking of him anymore, because symbolically he will be lying next to her. I am too near thee. So these Voltas, yet rather because, and I do not think of thee, are the moments in their physical encounter that she's trying to get him to come back for. So this isn't just a romantic love, it's a deeply erotic love. It's a private erotic message to her future husband. I miss you, I miss everything about you, and I want to make love to you. And now I hope you can see why they've had to enter into the illusion that they are written originally in the Portuguese, and then some of this imagery, which is obviously erotic, might be erotic by accident, because in the original Portuguese it wasn't really intended that way. Well, obviously that is the fiction. Now the question is, why would Robert Browning want his wife to publish these poems? Well, an obvious one is simply ego, isn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want to have these poems published when they're so complimentary about him? And the other reason is a literary one. He thinks that she's doing something completely different with the old sonnet form. Elizabeth has put a modern, bearing in mind this is 1850 or the 1840s, a modern spin on what the sonnet can do. Instead of just being the Petrarchan form written by the lover who's desperate for the attention of the object of his love, who probably doesn't return the same affection, he's noticed her passion is totally different from that. She's doing something new, exciting and fresh in her poems. He desperately wants her to publish them. Now, it's no coincidence that they were published while the Brownings were living in Florence. You know, it's much easier to escape from the sort of rumours that would have come out when the poems were published, but they would be rumours circulating in Britain, and they would be cut off at a distance from those, in the same way that the title of the collection also tried to show that at a distance, though it had actually come from the Portuguese and from Portugal.